As a fragile ceasefire is just holding in Gaza, questions remain as to what happens there and in the region in the future, including what will change now that Donald Trump is US President. Dr. Michael Oren was a minister in the Netanyahu government and is Israel's former ambassador to the United States. He's written several books on the region. He joins me now from Sydney. Thanks very much for your time. So the war itself, I suppose, where we get to where we are now, this was an operation in which the IDF had to totally change its approach many times. And I guess the most unique thing they faced was this network of tunnels.
Indeed, Tom. Good to be with you. No army in history has ever faced what the IDF faced in Gaza. In the Iraq War, there were the battles of Mosul and Fallujah, in which the U.S. military faced maybe 5,000 armed gunmen in cities that were abandoned with no tunnels. In Gaza, the IDF faced 30,000 terrorists in a population of 2.5 million people with 500 kilometers of tunnels. It's truly inconceivable. And they had a twin goal of somehow destroying Hamas and getting all the hostages back. Those twin goals have now proven to be sort of mutually exclusive. You can't destroy Hamas because Hamas now still has 30 Israeli hostages who we believe are alive. And by going in and trying to destroy Hamas, we know Hamas won't release those hostages. Hamas will shoot the hostages. So it's a terrible dilemma that the Israeli government faces. But there seems to be no choice but to go to a second phase of the ceasefire in which Hamas survives but gives us back those hostages.
Yeah, which I guess no doubt went to the tactic of Hamas to get those hostages because it's created that difficult situation for Israel. As with your hat on as a former ambassador as well, we know American sentiment and will is crucial to what Israel is doing. So if we look at that sentiment, first it was to eradicate Hamas, as you spoke about, and it's sort of gone on to a really strong focus on the ceasefire. What do you make of that change and where we arrive at now?
Well, President Trump has done two things. One, he has said that he's going to renew all arms supplies to Israel. The previous administration, the Biden administration, had held up the supply of certain vital forms of munitions. And secondly, President Trump has said, well, whatever Israel decides, whether it decides to renew the ceasefire, extend the ceasefire, or renew the fighting, either way, it's up to Israel. For Israelis, this is a brutally difficult choice. As I said earlier, you can renew the fighting. The Israeli army can go in with full munitions into those areas that it before refrained from going into them for fear of the safety of the hostages. But if you go into those areas and destroy Hamas, you're liable to lose those 30 remaining hostages. So it's a decision that no leader in the world should ever have to make. Unfortunately, Israeli leaders do have to make them, and have to make them in the next 2 weeks as this current phase of the ceasefire expires.
Yeah, exactly. And we're getting to the more difficult phase. And then I guess there's slightly longer term. There were the headlines of Donald Trump's suggestion on, Gaza, essentially, paraphrasing here, but turn it into a resort, which got a lot of criticism. But if that is what we've come to know as a sort of Trump headline and distraction, what has shifted in the region when we think of those countries that matter for what happens in Gaza and to Palestinians, such as, Egypt and Saudi Arabia?
Well, President Trump's statement, he made it several weeks ago during a press conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu, shocked a great number of people. He was accused of being ethnically cleansing Gaza, racism even. But the fact of the matter is, no one's even asked the Palestinians in Gaza what they want to do. No one asked the 11 million Syrians who fled Syria during the civil war what they wanted to do. But what he has done now is to shake up some of the long-held assumptions about the Middle East, that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was the core of all the Middle East instability, that the core of that was the fact that there wasn't a Palestinian state. President Trump said, no, the core of the conflict is not the absence of a Palestinian state. The core of the conflict is the socioeconomic conditions that create terrorism. And he sought to change that by transforming Gaza, as he said, into a resort area, the Riviera of the Middle East. But the upshot has been to really shake up the region. And now the Arab world, led by Egypt and Saudi Arabia, are coming back with a counteroffer, which talks about ways that Hamas can be demilitarized, the Gaza Strip can be demilitarized, and the Gaza Strip can be reconstructed in a way that it will no longer pose a threat to Israel or to any other country in the region.
Yeah, and so that broader lens is a fascinating one, for example, on the extent to which Hezbollah might be weakened. What about Iran, though? So in terms of capability, from what you've written and had to say, Israel or the US, certainly the US, but Israel as well, could actually destroy the capability of Iran, which is working right now to try to get the ability to create nuclear weapons. And it's doing this, inch by inch every day. How does that play out? Is that likely to happen? Because, Israel can't do that on its own, can it? This would have to be US permission, effectively.
I think Israel has the capabilities to do it on our own, not as well as we could do it with the United States, with the United States backing. And I think the United States, Israel will always try to include America to the greatest degree possible in its planning. But having said all that, in Gaza, nothing's going to happen as long as Hamas has the guns. You can't even begin to rebuild Gaza as long as Hamas has guns. You put any administration in there, and Hamas will simply shoot them, as they've done in the past. And nothing can be done about getting rid of those guns from Hamas ultimately unless you rid the Middle East of the source of those guns, and that is Iran. And that's not the source of the guns for Hamas, it's the source of the guns for Hezbollah, for the Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq, which have attacked American bases close to 200 times over the last year and a half, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen, supported by Iran, which have not just fired rockets at Israel, but have stopped international shipping through that major waterway, the Mandab Straits. So nothing's going to be done unless the Iranian threat is addressed. And the questions, I think you put it right, is how? Does Israel do it alone? Does it do it in conjunction with the United States? But also, what's the goal? Is it just to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon? Israel has the capability of doing that, setting that program back, maybe not eliminating it totally the way the United States does. It's no secret Israel does not have strategic bombers, only the United States does. But it may be a broader strategy of further weakening Iran. Israeli airstrikes in Iran have eliminated Iran's air defense system. Iran is basically vulnerable to all measures and kinds of attacks. This is the opportunity now to ensure that Iran, again, no longer threatens its neighbors, not just Israel, but states throughout the Middle East, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. Many states are threatened by Iran. Now's the opportunity to eliminate that threat.
Yeah, and of course, that was a big part of the last Trump regime, those sanctions, and it became a difference between the Democrats and Republicans. We're nearly out of time. Just briefly, I know you've written a book around Israel 2048. That will be 100 years of the modern Israel that we know. Can you flesh out in 30 seconds what you think that will look like?
Well, it's a conversation that grew out of a conversation between me and the Prime Minister about what our country should look like on our 100th birthday, which would be 2048. We were founded in 1948. And the major challenges facing Israel, would be surprised to hear, are not necessarily Hezbollah and Hamas. It's internal issues, whether the ultra-Orthodox will serve in the military, whether we can extend the great technological revolution of Israel to all sectors of Israeli society. We have a great problem with impoverishment in Israel, people below the poverty line. These are the great challenges facing Israel. If we can meet them and meet them head on, we will not only reach our first centennial, but we'll reach our bicentennial with great success.
Dr. Michael Oren, appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.